About our speakers today. But first, I know we have some network updates, so I'll hand it to Leah to go over those.
Yep. There we go. Thank you. Just a few reminders. Thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. We have a code of conduct that we recently consolidated, like 5 different ones into one code of conduct that we put out for review, as well as our anti-harassment and it says anti-displacement, but I think I meant to say discrimination. Anti-discrimination policy, anti-displacement is also a good idea, which is under review by the 15th of the month. We are launching a finance and business model survey for every organization to be completing. That would be 1 response per partner organization. That should come out hopefully tomorrow. Cole and I are working getting that out, and it would be due at the end of the month. That is a survey that the partners have asked us to do. We've last done it in 2014. So our data on sort of budget size, where you're getting your funding, all kinds of different business practices is pretty old. And I think it'd be really helpful to update that and be able to provide more technical assistance around those areas to the network, as well as to potential partners. We have a couple of webinars that we haven't quite sent out all the announcements about, but you're getting a preview here, and we should be sending out some notes around those soon. The first is a measuring and communicating impact webinar that Jake will help us host on the 27th to talk about what difference the work you all are doing in your communities makes and trying to communicate that story. We will also be launching the Impact Award application that week. So we think the Impact webinar is a good opportunity to think about what you might submit there. And then Cole is helping organize a Intro to GitHub webinar in April. And we haven't 100% finalized the hotel contract, but we are negotiating with the hotel for the meeting to be in Detroit in September for our full partnership meeting. It would be on a Monday to Wednesday, which is unusual for us. But just putting those dates out there for everyone. And Cole?
Yeah, thanks, Leah. So yes, we are very excited to have 3 great speakers today, plus me, briefly. Our first one will be Jason Chung from CT Data in Hartford, and they'll be going over the interactive map and dashboard of Asian American and Pacific Islander data that they produce for the Connecticut Department of Education. Next, we have Joshua Akers from the Mid-America Regional Council in Kansas City, and they recently produced a report on homeownership patterns as it relates to large investors in single-family homes. And so Joshua is going to be going over the methodology and implications of that report. And we have Tommy Pierce and I believe Nikolai Elsner from Neighborhood Nexus in Atlanta. And as Leah alluded to, they'll be going over their recent initiative, the Data Breakfast Club, which was an effort to get people in the social sector organizations sphere and data practitioners to come together more. And finally, we'll have me briefly going over the this year's data inventory results for NNIP. So now I'll turn it over to Jason, the presentation materials he has.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Cole. It's definitely really nice to see everyone here today. So I am here with Jill Walsh this afternoon, who is our GIS and data analyst at CT Data. So she was the one who did a great job with developing this dashboard that we'll be sharing today. And I just wanted to give some background for this project before turning it over to her. So sometime in the fall of last year, a professor at the University of Connecticut reached out to us and said, you know, we're partnering with the Department of Education in Connecticut to build out their K-8 social studies curriculum. What we need is sort of a resource to help our students and staff understand the diversity of our AAPI population. And so through further conversations with them, we identified a high need to really understand the different ethnic groups that exist within the AAPI population. So, 5% of the population in Connecticut is AAPI. Well, how many are Chinese? How many are Iranian? How many are Korean? And once we get a better understanding of that ethnic diversity, let's look at where these communities live within Connecticut and how it differs by region. And so this sort of detailed ethnicity data is really hard to find, and it's certainly not readily available for teachers and students to explore in an easy to use and easy to understand format. So at CT Data, we actually had been wanting to explore a census data product called the Detailed DHCA that was released as part of the 2020 census, which includes data on, I think, 1,500-ish detailed race and ethnic groups. So this dashboard was the perfect opportunity for us to use this data to make an impact on K-3 education in Connecticut. So now I'll turn it over to Jill, who will share the dashboard and some of its features.
Thanks, Jason. I'm gonna share my screen. I think you should all see it now. So this is what the dashboard looks like. We built it with Tableau Public, well, Tableau Desktop uploaded to Tableau Public. And you land on this total view page. We have a data notes tab, a detail view, and an all ethnicities view also. So this first page, we wanted to give like an overview of the total Asian and Pacific Islander population in Connecticut. So we wrote it out, and this number comes from the 2020 census redistricting file. So we included anyone who selected Asian or Pacific Islander or Asian or Pacific Islander in combination with any other race on the census form. And then we show the same data by map and chart so that students who are familiar with like one form or another have a chance to like get their feet wet and start to understand like how to read these visualizations before getting into the more details on the next view. So we just show the total AAPI population by county, and you can hover and get the number, and then also on the map. And then the next view is the detail view page. So this is where we brought in the DDHCA data that Jason mentioned. And if you notice, the totals are a little bit different on this map. So the DDHCA data has two options kind of for ethnicity data. One is each ethnicity alone, and then one is each ethnicity alone or in any combination. So we used alone or in any combination. So if you selected Asian, Indian, Chinese, and Filipino, you would be counted in each of the three groups. And then the map is the total of all of the ethnicities that are shown in the bar chart. So that's why the numbers are a little bit higher than in the previous page. So on this page, you can click on a county and get more detail for that county. And it changes. And then we also have the option to select a region and get ethnicities for that region. So if you're interested in East Asian ethnicities, you can select that and the map and chart will update. And then you can also get that for each county individually. And you can do like any combination of the checkboxes. And then one last view, we wanted to kind of fill this use case of someone just thinking like, okay, what's the Vietnamese population of Hartford County? So we created an alphabetical list of the available ethnicities from the DDHCA file. So you just scroll down in this and then click on the name, and then the map will update. And we have the total Connecticut number and then the county totals. And one interesting thing with this data set is the county differential privacy method is different from the state differential privacy method. So the county totals don't add up to the state, which is a lot more obvious when you have a group that's only in the DDHC file in one county. So we have data notes explaining that. And then we have the data notes page up here that goes into more detail for all of these different census, all 2020 census data, but different 2020 census sources and files that we used. So I'll stop sharing. We're happy to answer any questions or discuss.
So in that last view, you could get other ethnicities in addition to the Asian Pacific Islanders?
Yeah, so we actually consulted with the professor who reached out to us, and he basically said, based on, his research and studies, these groups should be included in this dashboard, even though they might not be like within Asia. Just culturally, they might be Asian. So we consulted with him, and there were a few other groups outside of Asia that we included in this dashboard.
I did have a question. So I know you all mentioned in our emails that you designed this with a K through 8 audience in mind. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that and how or what you had in mind when you were designing the dashboard, or if there were any other audiences in mind.
Yeah, so we, in consultation with UConn, talked about like what types of things the teachers would want to do with the students when using this tool. So with that in mind, we started with the overall page in case students aren't used to like looking at a map with data like ingrained in it, which can be pretty different than like a street map. So we wanted to like start wide and then get into details later. And the reason why we have the 3 different tabs is so the students of different levels can kind of use different features of it to like use, find data with their own skill levels. And we thought the students would enjoy like clicking through the map and watching the charts change and seeing how selecting different things results in like different charts. So we also tried to keep the like design of it kind of straightforward and not super text heavy and not too overwhelming. So it's like clear you can explore by clicking on different things and kind of learn as you go.
Yeah, definitely. So is the primary use in mind for this dashboard like in the classroom, or is it going to be in front of a variety of different audiences?
Yeah, I think the goal is to actually implement this as part of the K-3 curriculum. And so teachers would be showing this in the classroom and students would be using it to explore the data themselves. So I think it's definitely intended to be sort of an educational tool, but I mean, I don't think anything like this exists for Connecticut. So I wouldn't be surprised if, policymakers or folks in other nonprofits or, state agencies do use this tool for their own needs.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Any other questions for Jason and Jill? All right, then we can go ahead and move on to our second speaker, which is Josh from Mark.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. So, long-time lurker on the emails, first-time participant. I've been at Mark for about a year and am part of this housing process. So let me share my screen. I got a short presentation. If you have any questions as we go, let me know. All right. So is this in? There we go. So let me get to. So give you a little bit of what this is. We're part of the regional. We have a regional housing partnership going here in Kansas City. That's between Mark, which is an MPO, and COG all meshed together. Also doing a bunch of other service work beyond that, the region, and LIST Greater Kansas City. So those are 2 main partners in this project. And the idea of looking at affordable housing in particular emerged from work by the First Suburbs Coalition here. And the kind of graphic that you see there, the 7 pillars of the regional housing partnership. We will just talk about the data and analysis, of course, and what we're doing today. one of the things that we often do is just throw up this continuum that's often used here to talk about housing. So most of our work is focused really in that continuum where vulnerable populations and then going to the right. So we're thinking about housing affordability, we're thinking about preservation, increased supply, all of those pieces. Working on houselessness issues and other parts is coming back to the fore in the region. But as of this moment, that is not the place that the housing partnership is spending its time or its capacity. And we've been in the research, analysis, and education phase for about a year and a half now. So we decided to look at investor ownership for a couple of reasons. One, over 75% of the developed land area within the region, which is 9 counties and 119 cities, are single-family homes. So we wanted to figure out what was going on in terms of owner investor concentration here that had not been looked at within this part of the country in any kind of serious way. There's a number of impacts that you all are probably familiar with on high volume investor ownership. Concentrated ownership results in pricing power, higher rents. Targeted houses are often the price range of lower to moderate income families, so it limits supply of properties for sale. But you see basically first-time home buyers often competing with cash buyers for a limited supply of introductory housing. We also limited our research to looking at owners that had 10 or more properties. So excluding mostly mom and pop. Some people might want to go higher with what a mom and pop is, but there's research that shows that you start to see undesirable impacts on cities and neighborhoods at that 10 plus level. So higher evictions. Don't think that's a question. Okay. So again, going back, this is just a map of all single family residential in that region here in Kansas City. We're on both sides of the state line, quite massive, widespread. About 25% of our rental properties are owned by someone who does not live at the address. So, at that lower level, under 10, determining if it's someone's second home or other piece was relatively difficult, and we left that side. But of those, about 30,000, 20%, are owned by large investors. So those are owned by investors. I don't know why it says large there, but 10 or more properties. Nearly 6,000 of these are owned by just four investors: Amherst, Cerberus, Vinebrook, and Homevestors. Most of these are equity investors. They're operating in other cities around the country and are quite active here. Within this region, we have Amherst that owns more than 2,000 properties. And one of the things that's interesting, particularly about equity investors and matches up with what we're seeing in other parts across the country, is primarily inner ring suburb investment. The other thing that's interesting within these companies and the ownership is for those large investors and mega investors with 500 plus properties. What we see is that the values of the homes are higher. The neighborhoods in which they've targeted homes have higher educational attainment and higher incomes on average, and are primarily in areas which most of our local governments had assumed to be, primarily single family ownership. So there's a transition going on within these areas and these neighborhoods that was sensed in large part by local government officials, but not quite understanding what the scope was. So we're trying to bring more information to that. We have Vinebrook here, and then Homevestors. Homevestors you may be familiar with. You might have received a card in the mail asking if you'd like to sell your home. They'll do it quick and on the cheap. So how do we go about doing this and identifying these pieces? We basically, through our partnerships, brought in assessor files from all 9 counties. We then isolated single family within all of those assessor files, isolated LLCs, and then also did a search on duplicates of owner address to compile an initial file. Of those, we saw about 30,000 properties that qualified. We then went ahead and searched through corporation commission filings, primarily in Missouri and Kansas, to identify ownership beyond the name of the LLC. So looking for names of other companies, looking for identification of owners as or names of individuals as owners or as officers within a company. And then using that information to ID parent corporations such as home investors, and then consolidate ownership under those and then map them out. So the work that we're doing now with this information is one, we've released a series of data stories, and there are some tools that allow the public to investigate further. Most of those are presented at heat maps at the public level. But we are doing data sharing at the address level with our partners that are interested in more information, and then partnering around how to use this data as really a base file to understand processes and practices in their community and what those impacts are. So thinking about any kind of geocoded data or any kind of address level data they might have, whether that's code enforcement, eviction, noise complaints, whatever it is that they want to look at, tying that to this base file to understand if there are single points of ownership or concentrations of ownership that they may want to seek out other ways to address or engage with those owners. So anyway, that was a quick, and I can talk about other parts and I can leave it at that. We have a website, mark.org/housing. And on that website, you'll have a link to the Housing Data Hub, which we've built using our ArcGIS experience that has basic demographic information, housing data. We've incorporated the CHAS data there as well, so you can look at conditions like cost burden, overcrowding, limited plumbing, etc. It also includes redlining maps and then a series of data on LIHTC and roll-off dates as well. So that's there in addition to all of the data stories that go with it, from this work to spatial mismatch to affordable housing gap within the region. So yeah, I'll stop now. I forgot to start my timer.
I think you're doing well.
Okay.
Josh, do you have, when you said you limited to owners with more than 10 units, was that after you had sort of unmasked the real owner? Or do they have to have 10 units within an LLC and then you work to identify those LLCs?
No, all LLCs were included in the original list. So even if they were single LLCs, those were looked at. And then we also looked at, I mean, right, you can get into issues if it's not an LLC. Is John Smith the same John Smith or whatever else? So looking at owner address and site address in that way to narrow that down. But in the initial phase, all LLCs that were identified as single family were in first.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if you had an LLC,
Right.
say call it LLCA, and they were one of the Homevestor LLCs, but that LLC only owned 5 properties. Would you capture that or not as a Homevestor?
Yeah, so the original, we brought those 9 assessor files together and kept any single family identified as an LLC in from whether it was only mentioned once or whether it was mentioned 100 times.
Yeah, okay.
So that was in the list, yeah. And there's some ways to kind of quickly start to sort them as you work through it. So you'll find that maybe there's 1, 2, or 3 addresses that a parent uses repeatedly. So you can sort on that and start to pull things in. And occasionally what that meant was actually circling back to the original files to see if some of those owner addresses popped up in what we might have missed in the beginning, just in case.
Yeah, seems like it's nice to have actually more counties because you get more data to kind of build those relationships.
It is nice. It is also county. It is also county data, and it is 9 counties of data. So they all have their own peculiarities, what they include and what they don't. So it's it's good.
In 2 states, huh?
9 counties, 2 states, 119 cities. So lots of fun. I've done work like this previously, but all of that was in Detroit and Wayne County, and in Detroit in particular, which is its own complicated beast in a lot of ways, but was not. 9 counties. So yeah.
Other questions, or I have I could go on. Do you have any insights into how LISC is using the data?
At this point, we've taken the lead on that component. We're in conversations with them. Both us and List National are partnering on a multifamily project that's similar right now. Looking at List Greater KC is primarily focused on Kansas City, Missouri, and we're expanding that multifamily to a regional approach. So trying to use the same process to understand consolidation of ownership in units. Where List Greater KC, I mean, I'm not going to speak for them where they're at exactly, but a lot of where their projects are right now is looking at how to increase affordability in that kind of 20 to 50 unit multifamily building range. And so that has been their primary focus. But yeah, they're still figuring out where they want to use the single family component.
As a regular user of your Detroit data over here, I'm just curious if you found like what were like similarities or differences you found between the two data sets that like maybe just like at a high level were eye-catching.
That's a great question. You know, one of the things that I found about this is, so this kind of steps around your question and we'll come back. You know, beyond the Detroit data, a lot of the work that Eric Seymour and myself were doing was looking at, you know, all the Great Lakes cities. We were looking at Las Vegas, we looked at Atlanta, and we looked at Florida. And what is interesting in the Kansas City region is it kind of maps up with the way we see private equity operating in moderately stable or growing regions. I think what jumps out between this and the Detroit data is that you don't see as many of the land contract operators. So places like Harbor Portfolios, when they were going big, or Vision, or others like that. You see more private equity in Kansas City versus what you were seeing in Detroit. And that's in the city proper, as well as versus Detroit proper. I would say where they have definite similarities are in the number of people operating in that 50 to 100 range of ownership, and the way in which those concentrations, and especially in that 50 to 100 range, are in disadvantaged communities in particular, and communities that have seen disinvestment over decades and long periods of time. And then you don't see as many large regional operators in the Kansas City region as you see in Detroit. So in that case, I'm thinking of things like Detroit Property Exchange and Michael Kelly in Detroit, who is a locally based, you know, large buyer and operator. There just weren't quite as many of those that we identified in the region here. And the other cool, weird thing that we need to explore further is Kansas City, Kansas. Mom and pops seem to survive the pandemic relatively well compared to what we saw anywhere else. So hopefully there'll be some space or time to get in there and understand, you know, what some of the differences are. And that's a really rich and diverse and different community here in the city, and to understand maybe what some of the factors were that allowed those mom and pops to make it through that we didn't see in other places.
And you didn't see that in Kansas City, Missouri either, you mean? Or it was the whole measure?
Not to the same extent. Yeah. Kansas City, Kansas has it just had a really rich, really large, stable segment of landlords between in that under 10 and that 10 to 25. There are some edges that have seen some large scale investment, but there's just kind of a vein of rental housing that kind of stayed in that lower tier investment.
Okay, any other questions for Josh? We can go ahead and move on to our next speaker, who is Tommy.
Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm Tommy from Neighborhood Nexus in Atlanta. And while I share my screen, I'll give a quick shout out to Joe. We were getting some advice from our friends in Cleveland yesterday, and I mentioned I was doing a showcase next week, and he said, I'm pretty sure that's tomorrow. So thanks for helping me out. Let's see. Screen 2. Share. All right. Cool. So we've been we're in Atlanta, we're in very much like experimental mode, especially the last few months. For 14 years, we were based out of the Atlanta Regional Commission, our metro planning organization. We spun out in August of last year to kind of pursue some of our own ideas. There was like philosophical and business model reasons for all of that, but it really enables us to think differently about how we're doing our work. But it's also been a really good chance to kind of reflect back on what our mission is, what are the unique roles we can play in Atlanta. And when we went back to our mission, it turns out it wasn't to just say yes to literally everything and do as many projects as you can until your team burns out and quits. It was actually to growing a culture of data-informed decision-making across Georgia's social impact sector. That's probably pretty similar to a lot of the purposes and missions of most NNIP partners. But I think one thing that we really realized is that we weren't focusing on the growing a culture. And so like, we don't have to do everything ourselves, but we should be helping support organizations make better decisions, better understand how to approach data, not just, sending them our favorite spreadsheets and things like that. And so we've really been thinking a lot about capacity building and really for the last year, but operationalizing some things in the last few months. Very quickly, because I think how we got to where we are is important and maybe has more lessons learned than the actual event we recently pulled off. Our theory of change, which is pretty simple, that if we are going to change the culture of our sector, we need some sort of we need to reach a tipping point of organizations doing data well. And then that's when we'll start to impact how organizations across Atlanta are either kind of somewhat standardized in the way they're talking about certain issues or are just using data in their operations. But we also know that organizations don't make decisions, the people who work there do. And so this kind of drives us to really think about how do we support nonprofit professionals, public agency folks, and even, like public servants and students, all of that to understand concepts and feel less overwhelmed by data. If we can create confident and comfortable nonprofit professionals, I think we'll have a lot of impact, maybe more than the 10 or 12 projects we do a year. So our capacity building has really evolved in the last couple of years. It started with us kind of going around and doing trainings at organizations. This is us at Emory University talking to students about kind of the nonprofit sector, the social sector, how that works and how they might apply their data science degrees. That is a lot of work to just physically go to all of these places. So we started producing things like our Housing Data 101, Education Data 101 guides, because our data infrastructure, when you go to Data Nexus, our big GIS tool, there's thousands of indicators. We wanted to help people know where to start. So we've been just developing these different ideas, and I think they all have been good quality. They've got good ratings when we do evaluate them. But but they haven't had this huge reach or this as big an impact as we wanted. And my weird pandemic hobby was reading marketing books, and I don't really know why, and I think my high school self would hate that. But there's this idea that I came across, and this was just the best quote I could go back and find quickly, was around taking your organizational zealots and getting them together and kind of building community. And if we can get 100 people to buy into this, then maybe we can grow Nexus. And so it's more of a branding and marketing exercise than a data specific exercise, but we're trying to really instill Neighborhood Nexus in Atlanta nonprofit culture and position ourselves as the thought leaders. And I think we're there, but I think we could do a better job. And I kind of had this idea that we actually already have 100 or more zealots. They just don't know each other. And so we started doing these webinars. We've never proactively done trainings. We usually will do it at a request of someone else, or we'll participate in an event or something. And we got pretty good participation here too, actually. It went really well. But then we would do, 20 minutes of content, and then everyone's just wants to share their own ideas. They want kind of emotional support. So people are actually coming to our events to share, because they tend to be the only person at their organization that is thinking about these things. And they didn't know who to talk to. They didn't know how to build skills or acquire certain tools or talent. And so in addition to our trainings, we came up with this idea of the Data Breakfast Club. And the first thing we did was go get a graphic designer, because we feel like we have to make data cool, right? So I get a lot of questions about, democratizing data, and I feel like that's been done. Like, all the data exists. It exists mostly in one place a lot of times, but we have to figure out how to make data actionable, and I think we have to make it kind of really engaging or fun. We want people to actually want to be involved in it. So we came up with this idea of the Data Breakfast Club that feels kind of exclusive, but it's not. But it's a way to get people together. This was on February 13th, so we made it Valentine's themed. And we put an ad, like not an ad, but we put like 2 LinkedIn posts and mentioned our newsletter and sent out an email to our list. We actually had to stop talking about it 2 weeks out, because we had over 100 RSVPs when we were thinking there'd be maybe like 12 to 20. We could not afford enough donuts for that many people, so we just stopped talking about it. And then of the 100 and something, we had about 70 people show up. I want y'all to focus on how happy everyone is that's in these pictures. Like I said, we had a graphic designer. She also made us these donut chart stickers so we could hand out to everyone that was there. We want to do a different sticker every time to get people to come back and be engaged. Try to get like clever with the marketing and branding of these things to get people to want to be there. And then when they're there, they might like get tricked into learning something. And so we had a lot of people. We had folks from the corporate world. If you were kind of the data for good, audience, that they tend to do a lot of hackathons or volunteer over a weekend, but we want to maybe connect them to an organization that has some ideas, and maybe they could join their board and be more strategic over a longer period of time and figure out how to do impact in different ways. We had a lot of folks from like Atlanta Regional Commission and some of our local municipalities. We had mostly nonprofit folks. We had some academic folks. So it's a really good, diverse mix of who showed up, probably largely driven by donuts and coffee in a really cool space. This was in Mercy Care, which is a federally qualified health center. It's where our offices are based now since August. And you can see construction in the background. They're building a whole bunch of affordable housing units right next door. And then across the street is the MLK Recreation Center. Our office is right next to the MLK Memorial. So it's like a very cool spot as well. We did like very brief remarks, and then we had Rebecca Partial, who is the associate director of an education organization that we help use data with every year. They do some like relatively simple analysis, but we go through school level data across 5 counties and 8 school districts to find bright spots. So those like lower income schools, or they have high proportion of students with disabilities, and then they tend to outperform what you would expect. And then they go to those schools and figure out what they're doing differently and try to scale those. So it's a really cool organization. They do really cool work. We help them out all the time. They're friends of ours. And so they came and talked about what they do as kind of a case study. And then we got feedback. So it was went really well. Like there's some talking, but it was a lot of sort of organic connections and giving people the time. It's Valentine's, so we did I did like my data love story, which is how I got into this. We did speed data-ing, where we made people talk one-on-one about what they're trying to get out of their data relationship. So we did a handful of things, just trying to make it, probably overly like, if you're going to do something cheesy, you kind of have to go like all the way with it. We think it went really well, and we're going to keep doing it. We did a survey to figure out what that looks like in the future. We'll probably do quarterly events with maybe a Slack channel or something in between. Some of our goals are to give, just offer this space. There were some really great connections that happened right there. We've had a lot of follow-ups ourselves. People have gotten technical support. There's a lot of emotional support going on, it turns out. So that was cool. One of our ideas was to decenter ourselves from the conversation, and that lets it be more focused on community, but and that feels kind of jargony, but it's also like it's an efficiency thing for us. We have a lot of organizations come to us and say, do you know someone else working on this? Or we'll have a university reach out and it's like, we've got interns, do you have projects? And this is kind of a way for us to get all those people, and we invited all of them to the same space so they can make those connections themselves. Makes it a little bit easier on us if we can just have that space for them to develop those relationships. If we had something like a Slack channel, and if we can, we're trying to figure out if people will actually do it or if they just like the idea of it. But if there's ways to keep this going, and maybe it's just more in-person things more frequently, I don't know yet. But we think people can provide each other technical support. We can build some partnerships, collaborations. And then, by doing that, we also think it'll be easier for people to acquire talent and tools. So knowing what they're looking for instead of just trying to Google things, like you've got a friend now that works in the neighborhood next to you, or you work in the same community and you can talk to them about it. And then we have a few kind of needs, right? So we realized actually doing this well is kind of expensive. So I made an announcement like at the thing, mentioned we need corporate sponsors for the food and for space, although we've had 3 or 4 different places, like organizations, offer their space to us. One suburban county, Gwinnett, they want us to do sort of a chapter out there already. We've only done one of it. And then, we're looking for we need philanthropic support to really make sure that we're all the things that surround it, not just the events, but our staffing, the kind of maintaining something like what the community is. But at the end of the day, like the idea was maybe we can be more effective building capacity of organizations by building a community of practitioners that can help each other and think more about the sector. And that's that. Yeah, that's it. Stop sharing. And Nikolai's, who actually did most of the work on this, is also here to field any questions.
Do you think that something like this would be effective, centered more around like a specific tool or something, where you're like bringing together people for like case studies or talking about like their tool, or is it really your intent to focus, please be quiet, to focus on decentering you guys from the conversation?
Yeah, we made like a strategic choice, or maybe I like to think it's strategic, but it was just a resourcing thing. We didn't have any audio or video, like we didn't have any slides. There was nothing. We wanted to feel like an after school club kind of. And we also didn't think there was gonna be as many people as there were. And we didn't tell the facilities people how many people there were, but we didn't actually show any tools or show any data. It was just conversations. And so even when Rebecca presented about what her organization does and how they use data to scale these initiatives, it was just talking and just a conversation. I think we've tried to get people to like have conversations around our own tool. Data Nexus is our big one, for years, and it just, and I don't know if it's because it's kind of feels like a GIS tool and there's a learning curve, but I feel like it's kind of off-putting if you're not already comfortable with data. And so we just focused on having a good conversation and making connections.
Yeah, and I think out of the 1 hour time of the event, there were max 10 to 15 minutes where there was a script, like an agenda, like 5 minutes for Rebecca, 5 minutes for Tommy, 5 minutes of introduction. And the rest is just, there's donuts and a space for you to hang out. And I think a lot of people appreciated that in the sense that they said we moved from the pandemic, from being in a Zoom call to being in highly formatted events with agendas, breakout rooms, and this sense of letting us go to search what we want and talk about what we want freely was very interesting to see how that was one of the key feedbacks that we received. And it's what we want to maintain here. We've thought of new activities that we want to do in terms of what we can get out of this, and based on the feedback. So it's going to mutate and evolve, and we're going to learn more things, but we definitely want to keep it less structured and less about the data tools and more about what everybody that's coming here needs.
All are you planning, sorry, I have lots of questions because this is what I do at D3 a lot of the time. But are you, how did you collect that feedback? If if there weren't slides and scripts and all that stuff, were you collecting feedback? And then two, are you thinking about kind of some way of capturing those stories around the connections that get made at the event so that you actually have that information? Like, this happened, like I talked to this person about this data set, and then like this happened, and like now both of our programs are working together on this new thing, and we like a grant, like magic thinking sometimes. But if that happens, do you have like a way to figure it out?
Yeah, well, about the feedback very quickly, it's just we printed a bunch of QR codes and just pasted them everywhere, in the exit, in the bathroom, in the everywhere. So there was always a reminder, hey, please, this is possible because you are here and you're building it with us. So make sure that you leave your comments so we can make changes for the next one. And we receive a lot of comments, and we reached out to the people that we know from that were there to also get some information, and we might add other elements in the future.
Yeah, I think on the capturing the connections that come out, like I'm trying to make myself care less about that. It feels like one more thing for us to try to track and measure and all of that when people stayed in that space. It was a 1-hour event. People stayed around for like an extra couple of hours. It was really cool. And just there was a group that does I mean, we had 2 like Atlanta historians talking about city mandates from the 70s, and it was just like that wouldn't have happened. Like, it was fun to just watch that kind of thing. I don't know if it'll turn into a project, but I don't think it needs to. I think it's sort of a lot of this is if something ever comes up, like those 2 people know that they can bounce ideas off, and they both have like a deep understanding of like the history of neighborhoods in Atlanta, things like that. So I feel like if we had some sort of listserv or Slack or Discord or whatever, there's probably a way to track some of those conversations or through like channels, but I'm really not thinking about it too much at the moment. Although we always love to hear stories, and we might do some follow-up surveys just to ask if anything happened.
And I think that's those examples are gonna show up or come up eventually from more of these experiences. We're planning on doing more of these breakfasts along the year. I think we're planning on doing one around May 4th, thematic of Star Wars, and maybe one for Halloween, which I'm excited about. But maybe that's gonna be a happy hour. So there's more to come.
Okay. Any final questions?
I think we should probably get to yours, Cole.
Yeah. We have just over 5 minutes, which is about how long it takes. But yes, thank you, Tommy and Nikolai. It's really cool. I really like this project. Okay. Let me share my screen. Okay. It's like there we go. Bar. All right. Yes. So today we are going over the annual data inventory results we collected last year in 2023. So local data is central to the NNIP mission. And so therefore, we ask NNIP partners to report out annually on their local administrative data that they maintain, including the sources. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, we went back to seeing your
Oh, okay.
other slides. We're no longer on presenter view.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry, I know my notes are in the bottom. Could we just keep it this way, or?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so therefore, we ask partners to report out annually, and that includes the sources, time period coverage, and geographic level of their files. And we've been doing this annually since 1996. So the reason we do the data inventory is both for you and for us. So for partners, it's a chance for self-assessment to reflect on the data that you have, the data you'd like to have, to think about how you could use the data you have in your work. And for the network, it helps improve and strengthen us, and it helps us to identify cross-site opportunities to see which partners have data available in certain areas. And so 30 cities updated their data inventory this year. So we want to express our appreciation to everyone who did take the time to update the data. We really appreciate it. And so we developed this small geography neighborhood indicator performance score, or SNP, from partners' data inventories, which assesses how well the network is doing to assemble, transform, and maintain neighborhood level data, and encourages partners to continue and expand on the hard work of obtaining and maintaining data across topics. And the score is based on 10 components, which are displayed on this slide. We narrowed the list to 10 subcategories from the 23 data subcategories in the overall inventory to represent topic areas that are important to having a broad understanding of neighborhood data. So the SNP creates a standardized scale for each organization, which can be to compare across partners and places. For each component, if you have the data in-house at a small geography and it is current and recent for one of these years, you can see 2022 to 2020, then you get 1 point towards your SNP score. Small geographies are defined as one of either address parcel, block group, census tract, school, zip code, and other sub-city or county geographies by ward. And the school geography applies only to school and student data. And recent data is different for the various components based on assumptions made for each one. For example, due to the length of time it takes for public health departments to process vital statistics, typically the most recent data one can acquire are 2 to 3 years old. And so here you can see the distribution of the 30 cities and 31 organizations and their SNP scores. So after computing the SNP score for each partner, we added up to see how the network is doing. And our top score had a perfect 10, which we're excited about. And we'll recognize that shortly. And the linear distribution average was 3.5, similar to 3.6 from last year. And the median was 3. And then we determined the percentage of partner organizations that reported for each category of data. And this chart shows us that not all data are equally common, and that school and property characteristic data were the most common reported, while child and adult health were the lowest. So our highest SNP score was Data Driven Detroit, had a perfect 10 this year. So congratulations to them. And once again, thank you to everyone for doing the data inventory. And wanted to say that we will be reaching out individually to everyone with their individual SNP scores, and then uploading the general report to the website sometime this week or maybe early next. I know we're about at time. I can't answer any questions, but I know we only have a minute. So we can also wrap it up.
And congratulations again to Detroit.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't know if
Yeah.
you were expecting that, Stephanie.
I was not expecting that to be us, but I'm unsurprised because our team has been working really, really hard to make it all happen. It's not me, that's for sure. Like, I'll just make that very clear. Not me doing that.
Well, once again, we wanted to just say congratulations. It's definitely very impressive. Okay, well, thank you to everyone for coming out and participating in today's idea showcase. And thank you to all of our presenters. And we'll see you at the next one in a few months.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.